Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, where you'll hear highly accomplished and fascinating guests talk about the challenges they've overcome and the winning mindsets that have led them to great success. And now your host, Dr. Bob.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. In each episode, I spend time with a very interesting and successful individual to hear about the path that they've taken and to uncover the key elements of their character, the secrets, if you will, that led them to where they are today. And my guest today is Nathan Hochman, the leading Republican candidate for the office of Attorney General for the state of California. After the governor, the Attorney General is the second highest and most powerful official in the state. But what does the Attorney General do? Well, prior to preparing for this podcast, I had no idea, and I'm pretty sure that most of you didn't either. So in preparation for this podcast, I did a bit of homework, and here's what I learned. The Attorney General is the state's top lawyer and law enforcement official, protecting and serving the people and their interests through a broad range of duties, including safeguarding the state's citizens from harm, preserving natural resources, enforcing civil rights laws, helping victims of identity theft, mortgage-related fraud, illegal business practices, and other consumer crimes. In simple terms, the role of the AG is to enforce the laws of the state. Okay, now that you know something about the role of the Attorney General, let's find more about Nathan, the man who wants to be the next Attorney General of California. Nathan is a lifelong Californian. He was born here, grew up here, went to school here, met his wife here, and raised his kids here. Public service is in Nathan's DNA. After graduating from Brown University, he attended Stanford Law School, where he earned his law degree. After graduation, he clerked for a federal judge and then became a prosecutor. In my view, due to the spiraling crime rate in our cities, the most relevant experience that he brings to the Office of Attorney General here in California is his successful tenure as a criminal prosecutor. He joined the U.S. Department of Justice, where he was an assistant U.S. attorney in the criminal division, responsible for the Central District of California. In that role, Nathan prosecuted over 100 different cases, ranging from corrupt government officials and tax evaders to narcotics traffickers and violent gang members. Nathan also ran the environmental crime section, targeting air, water, and land polluters. In 2008, Nathan was nominated by President George Bush and subsequently was unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as an Assistant Attorney General of the United States, overseeing the Department of Justice's Tax Division. In that role, Nathan led a team of over 350 lawyers to prosecute cases throughout the United States. After many successful years in government service, Nathan then went into private practice, where he soon became one of the nation's leading criminal justice, defense, and tax lawyers. Having served on all sides of the courtroom, first as a judge's law clerk, then as a prosecutor, and more recently as a defense attorney, Nathan's path has been unique and has given him a balanced perspective on the law. His successful efforts have been recognized numerous times. He's been awarded the Attorney General's Medal, the IRS Chief Counsel Award, the Inspector General's Award for Excellence, the U.S. Department of Justice Director's Award for Superior Performance, and the Los Angeles Jewish Federation Torch of Justice Award. Now, getting back to the upcoming race for Attorney General, there are currently 5 individuals seeking the nomination for that position. The primary will be held on June 7th, and the top 2 vote getters will then be on the November ballot. It's assumed that the current Attorney General, Democrat Rob Bonta, will be one of those 2, and it's my hope that Republican Nathan Hochman will be the other. Nathan, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Dr. Bob.
The Attorney General is a very important role. You'll be in charge of more than 4,500 employees, lawyers, investigators, peace officers, and administrative personnel. I'm sure that soon after you take office, you're going to hold a meeting or many meetings with your staff, and at that time, you'll likely tell them your priorities for the next 4 years. I'd like you to give us a preview of that speech.
Well, you know what? That's a fascinating way to look at it, Dr. Bob, what I actually will say in that first speech. Mm-hmm. What I would probably start out is to give them the speech that I was given when I started the U.S. Attorney's Office. That was by one of the greatest criminal chiefs, probably in Department of Justice history. And he would give this speech about justice. And he would say that justice is the client that you're going to serve. It's an unrelenting client. But if you give justice your all, your full efforts, it'll be the best client you ever have. I would do him an honor to repeat that speech as the starting point. And then I would go into my priorities. Assuming that nothing has changed between now and probably the next 6 to 8 months, we have exploding violent and street crime on our streets that have gotten and made the situation to the point where people are afraid to send their children outside, their parents, their grandparents, their neighbors. It would be my number one priority. You don't hear about it from the California Attorney General right now. Mm-hmm. He talks about justice in an abstract way. For me, leaving your car on the street and having it broken into, being worried about whether or not someone's going to follow you home, whether it's from a nightclub, a restaurant, a bank or anything, and rob you at your home. Whether or not you're watching in your CVS and people are just running out with less than $950 because they know that they're not going to be prosecuted. This spiral of lawlessness that has descended across California would be one of my first priorities to address. And I would say it just like that basically one person running out of a CVS became 3 people running out of a Walgreens, became 80 people running out of a Nordstrom's, smash and grab robberies, follow home robberies, double-digit rises in homicides. And we have to not only stop the spiral of lawlessness going down, we have to reverse it.
And it's clear to me that there have always been and there will always be criminals in every society. That hasn't changed. We don't have more criminals than we had 2 years ago. But what has changed is the failure of the prosecutors, the DA offices in various cities to prosecute these crimes, and therefore the police have difficulty Why would you arrest somebody if they're not going to be prosecuted, if they're going to be let out on bail? So the problem isn't that there's more poverty in this country that leads to crime. That is nonsense. The same people who committed crimes in the past are there now, but they feel more freedom to commit these crimes.
Dr. Bob, you're 100% correct. You know, what's been interesting, and I knew this as both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, is that the number one group of people that are paying attention to the changes of both the criminal laws and the changes of enforcement of those criminal laws are the criminals. And they see if the line's moving. So they see if they go ahead and do a smash and grab robbery, and now they get arrested. They're used to staying in jail, having to post bail that they probably can't post, knowing that they can't get out, commit more crimes. And when the next time comes around and they think, well, should I do a smash and grab robbery, or their friends are looking to see what happened to Joe because he got arrested, if they see that Joe's out by nightfall, they're incentivized to go ahead and follow Joe in a criminal path. If they see that the law is doing its job, that prosecutors are doing their job, and Joe's in jail, and Joe's going to stay in jail and pay a hefty punishment for his crime. And I'm not saying Joe needs to go to jail for 100 years, but there has to be consequences for crimes. It has to be uniform, transparent, and consistent.
Consistent.
They have to know where the line
is. You
is.
commit a crime, you're going to do the time.
Correct.
And
it's an old adage.
not the case.
Right.
And that changed in the past, I think, in the past 2 or 3 years.
100%. I mean, you can almost mark it from 2014. 2014 was considered one of our safest years in the last 50 years in California history. Every metric that measures crime and sort of general safety in society was down or was flat. Homelessness was flat. Fentanyl poisonings, which are going to kill thousands of Californians this year, didn't exist in California in 2014. So what you had, though, is you had Proposition 47 as an example. That was called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act.
Perfect. Great name. The left have tremendous liberty and creativity in naming laws.
And misleading people.
Right.
Because the way you got to safe neighborhoods and schools was almost tortured. The idea was if you changed the property laws and you made it easier to commit a misdemeanor, because now it would be just under $950, that fewer people would go to prison.
And save money on prisons.
And you would save money in prisons.
Absolutely.
And that money would then come back into the communities to, drum roll please, make your neighborhood safer and make your schools safer. Now, guess what didn't happen? Both parts of the equation. You didn't actually have people, you actually had fewer people going to jail. That part of the equation turned out. But the safety and the security that we were promised, the money that was going to go into local jails to make sure that if you get prosecuted for a misdemeanor and you stay at a local jail, you're kept in the local jail, never materialized. And therein lies the problem. So you started in 2014 with very safe conditions. You then started to weaken the laws. And it took a while for those weaker laws to actually find a full realization in creating problems, and that's the last 2 to 3 years. You got George Gascon in Los Angeles, came into 2020. You had Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, came in 2019. And they control 2 of the largest counties in the state of California. And they instituted a far-left liberal agenda. They basically said, look, we're not going to prosecute violent and serious offenders to the full extent of the law on the front end, and then we're going to let them out before they finish their sentence on the back end. And they said, and here's the interesting, the quotient after the equal sign, safety and security are going to get better. But, the statistics don't lie. As we talked about a moment ago, all metrics are showing that we're getting less safe and less secure in this society. Their academic theories on what they thought would happen haven't materialized. And instead of realizing that and then moderating and saying, you know what, we tried it, it didn't work, we got to go back to something at least in the middle, they have doubled down in almost all situations. And they're saying, look, it's going to work, but people are dying, people are suffering. Victims, which they don't focus on, are looking to these prosecutors and they're shaking their heads. I'll give you a perfect example in LA. Prosecutors used to go to people's parole hearings. Why? Because the prosecutor represented the victim. And at the parole hearing, you have the defendant, you have his attorney, the parole board, and they're making the big pitch as to why they've reformed themselves. Well, what about the victim that was originally hurt? Shouldn't the victim be heard? And the prosecutors in Los Angeles used to show up at these parole hearings.
To represent the victim.
But all of a sudden, under George Gascon, he banned his prosecutors from showing up to represent the victim. The victims were incensed. The LA Sheriff's Department actually now sends deputy sheriffs to represent the victims. But why would he, George Gascon, abandon the victims? And again, what you'll hear from me is that because, and you know this, the California Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer. The California Attorney General can go ahead and come into any of these cases that a DA chooses not to prosecute.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, 100%. It's actually in the California Constitution.
Okay. So a DA, the police arrest someone for a crime, they go to the DA, and the DA refuses to prosecute, the Attorney General can step in.
100%. Let me give you a great example. A couple months ago, an LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, off-duty officer was gunned down by 4 gang members. It's tragedy. The LA Sheriff, Alex Villanueva, by the way, even though he's a Democrat, he actually is supporting and endorsing me as a Republican. He looks at the case. He works with the LAPD police chief, Michael Moore. They find the 4 gang members who shot the police officer. Now, normally they would bring that to the LADA's office. It's the home. The LADA and the LAPD
Should work
they
together.
Hand in glove. So you'd want to, if you're in LA District Attorney's office, you want to do justice for the people who sacrifice so much for your office, the officers. But the sheriff and the police chief brought that case to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the feds. And the reason they did is that George Gascon has a blanket policy that he will not charge a gun enhancement. So if you use a gun you do the crime, but you also use a gun as part of the crime, you can get an additional enhancement on your sentence that if they prove it, you could serve more time.
Yes.
The same thing with gangs. If you're part of a gang, they have a gang enhancement that can also be
Makes
charged.
sense.
And if proven, it will increase the time you'll spend. Well, when you don't charge the gang enhancement, as George Gascon says he will never.
Or the gun enhancement.
Turns out that those murderers could have gotten out of prison in as little as 10 to 15 years. So they brought the case to the feds that have life without the possibility of parole as the punishment for the crimes that are going to be charged.
But under what federal statute would that apply?
It turns out that you've heard of the RICO statute?
Yes.
There's a violent crimes aspect of the RICO statute that basically says if we're looking at a racketeering organization,
which a gang is,
and they commit certain violent crimes, including murder, you can actually bring effectively a violent RICO prosecution that'll get you life without the possibility of parole for a murder.
And they did that because they were pretty certain that George Gascon or the local prosecutor wouldn't have done that.
100% certain. So here's where the California Attorney General comes in. And here's what I told Sheriff Villanueva. I said, if Nathan Hochman is the California Attorney General and George Gascon is going to prosecute these gang and gun enhancements, I'll come in with California Attorney General lawyers. We'll take over the case and you can bring it to the state rather than the feds.
I see.
It's one of the reasons he endorsed me.
And the reason why George Gascon and the other leftist prosecutors are refusing to prosecute these cases or let people out early, why do you think that is?
Well, he'll tell you. He's not shy about telling you. He basically says that, he goes back to the 1800s when he says that the police were originally established to go after runaway slaves.
Oh, that's why. Oh, it's all slavery. I know, I get it.
He pulls that thread forward.
I see. Okay.
And he said that basically our system is engaged in wholesale
racism,
systemic racism.
I see.
And the only way to cure that is to basically not put murderers or people who are violent or serious felons in jail to the full extent of the law. That arbitrarily he has some metric which exists in only his head and no other head I can find out as to how much you need to serve to pay your debt to society and reform yourself.
It's not your fault.
And that whatever limited and lesser sentence he believes is appropriate will also serve as a deterrent for others in the community thinking about committing the same crime.
The lesser sentence.
Will
serve as a deterrent.
As a deterrent in George Gascon's mind.
I see.
I couldn't disagree with him more on virtually everything he stands for.
Well, I think it goes deeper. My view is that the left in this country consists of people who hate this country. It doesn't matter why they hate it. They'll claim it's because of racism in the 1800s, 1700s, whatever. They hate this country. And they are refusing to enforce laws or rules and then putting in place other laws and rules to destroy our culture. That's what it's about. And it's not limited.
Dr. Bob, you make a very good point. I'm 90% with you on that one. Where I go is they're not grateful for this country. That these folks they need to travel.
Worse than not being grateful, they're hateful.
I think
they're hateful.
Well, certain aspects
if this country is so bad, then why do we have 100,000 people a month trying to get in?
Right.
Nobody's getting on a raft in Florida going south to Cuba or Venezuela. So the immigrants
right.
who are coming to this country,
You're absolutely right.
they understand that this is the land of opportunity. They may be coming for a handout, whatever, but they're not coming because it's a racist country.
Well, I remember that when the wall went up in Berlin, it wasn't to keep the West Berliners from coming to East Berlin. It was to keep the East Berliners in.
Leaving, yeah.
Because the folks knew that if the wall didn't exist, they'd run the heck out of that country.
It wouldn't be in East Berlin.
It wouldn't be in East Berlin.
So we have evil people running for office, being in office, and running this country. There's no other reason for the things that we've done. And on a national scale, this is not a California thing. Why did we leave $80 billion of war material behind in Afghanistan? Was it because we didn't have time to destroy it or didn't have time to take it out? No. We left it for enemies of America because the people who decided to leave it are enemies of America. Why is this administration trying as hard as it can to get back into a deal with Iran? Why did we free up $70 billion of money that was tied up and ship them in cargo planes? We all saw those planes being loaded with pallets of hundreds-dollar bills. Why would we do that? Because it helps enemies of America. So people have to wake up and hopefully at the local level, getting people, voting for people like you who love America, who want to restore safety to our communities and restore law and order. Hopefully they'll vote for you. They'll wake up and go to the polls in huge numbers and change this system around because we are headed for trouble.
And when people say to me, well, how can a Republican win in California? I give them the speech you just pretty much gave.
Yeah.
I say that, look, when safety and security has now risen to a top...
It's not a political issue. It's not a Republican issue.
Right. It's a Californian issue. And most importantly, it's a top 3 issue. The polling shows that safety, security, and homelessness now rank in the top 3 issues to 78% of Californians. And at that point, it's a wake-up call, or you might want to call it a woke-up call for the woke folks.
Never heard that. That's good.
And and it'll make people look to see who they're going to vote for Attorney General, because that position amongst statewide positions is uniquely situated in voters' minds with their safety and security. And so what I'm convinced is that people will look at Rob Bonta, our current California Attorney General, who's adopted the most far-left criminal justice agenda in complete alliance with George Gascon and Chesa Boudin. And they're going to say, is that guy keeping me safe at night? Are his policies keeping me safe at night? Is the fact that he took the job as a chief law enforcement officer with absolutely zero law enforcement background?
Oh, give me more details on that.
You'll love this. Rob Bonta was an Oakland assemblyman for 8 years. Before that, a deputy city attorney for San Francisco. Before that, an Alameda city council person. That's it. Was he a DA? No.
He never prosecuted criminals on either side or helped criminals on the other side.
Not even as a defense attorney.
I see.
He had literally no experience with the criminal justice system or the law enforcement system as a lawyer in that system. Yet he's become our chief law enforcement officer. I joke around that when I speak to voters that I say, Rob Bonta and my beautiful Labradoodle Lou share the same amount of law enforcement experience, which is 0. And so that, and again, Gavin Newsom, who appointed him, could have picked anybody. Any DA, moderate, someone who doesn't hate America or hate California, but really wants to protect them. And there's plenty of hardworking DAs out there in the system that Gavin Newsom could have picked. But he picked someone who gives me a chance to actually win this race. No law enforcement background, in complete alliance with George Gascon and Chesa Boudin from San Francisco, and he has no statewide name recognition. Sort of an added factor for the election.
He never won an election, right? He was appointed.
He was appointed to the office of Attorney General, so he's never won a statewide election. The only election he ever won was for the Alameda City Council and for and as assemblyman for Oakland. That's it. So he's never had to put himself out there with real Californians, people who aren't in that little sort of bubble of Oakland, and they live in the north of this state, the middle of the state, the farmlands of the state, the south of the state. This is all foreign territory for Rob Bonta. And I believe he's going to be in for a harsh wake-up call himself when he sees that Californians are not subscribing to his far-left agenda and are actually and materially concerned about their safety and security in a way that his agenda won't even get close to meeting.
Now, it's not only stories in the news that we read about a criminal bumping next to a target's car, so they get out of the car and then they hijack the car or carjack it or hold people up. It's not just that we read it in the news, but I had some people visiting me from out of state. They rented a car at the rental agency, and the rental agent told them, please don't lock the car when you leave the car. Don't lock the car because they'll break the windows, and that costs us more than if they just go through the trunk and the glove compartment. Please don't lock the car. So this is not just, hyping on the news. The news is always telling you something to make sure you don't change channels during the commercial. But this is real stuff that's happening. And these smash and grab at Nordstrom's, in broad daylight, 20 gangsters driving up in different cars with sledgehammers and crowbars, middle of the day. And because, of course, COVID gives them cover, they can wear face masks, right? So they can't readily be identified. And they go in and they smash the cases and steal materials in broad daylight. And it's not going to get better until there's a new attorney general. It is not going to get better.
I 100% agree with you, because the signal they're getting from the California Attorney General being transmitted to them by the local district attorneys is that there are certain crimes with no consequences. That somehow they feel their pain of their upbringing.
And these people, they're not stealing milk and sugar and bread, right? They're going to high-end stores stealing jewelry, high-end sneakers, or whatever.
Right.
This is not a matter of subsistence. These are not people who are starving. This is not from some old Russian novel, right?
Right. This is not a scene out of Les Miserables.
Yeah.
Where the guy's stealing the bread to feed his family.
Right.
No, they're stealing for drugs. Supply their drug habit. They're stealing to live a lifestyle that they don't want to, engage in hard work to actually obtain. And again, they're getting the license to do this from the California Attorney General himself, which is the shocking part, which is why I'm running.
Tell me about the effect on the police department, on the cop on the beat.
So you hit on it earlier in one of your statements that if the officer knows that if he goes to the trouble of arresting someone, writing a report, sitting there typing it out, interviewing witnesses, it's a long process to get it right because you want to win it in court. Then you present it to the district attorney's office. And they get it, and they give it back to you with that big stamp that says declined. You've just, in essence, wasted your time. Yeah. You could have been on the street. You could have been doing anything. And
you take risk when you arrest people. Officers take risk.
Absolutely.
The criminals usually are armed or they're violent. They don't want to get arrested.
Right. And so what happens is once that happens once, twice, or in a systemic way, then you stop going ahead and writing the report, which means you then stop going ahead and arresting the person to begin with. Because if you arrest them, you got to write the report. Then you stop answering the call. So if the CVS calls you, you either don't respond to it or you get around to it when you're going to get around to it. And then what happens is the CVS person knows the police aren't coming. So they stop calling. So they'll just make a note for their insurance. But that's okay with CVS and Walgreens and Nordstrom's. But what about the small businesses that don't have that level of insurance? What about a restaurant?
And just because something's insured doesn't mean there's no cost to it. The insurance rate goes up or the insurance next year is declined.
Right.
And this has led to, I believe, 10 CVS's or Walgreens closing in San Francisco.
100%.
They
Because
close.
that's how business works. Business says
If you can't make money, you're going to close the doors.
right. And imagine, you got some old elderly person, because this was in downtown San Francisco, that counts on the pharmacy that she can walk to.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's closed. Now the one down the block's closed. Eventually they're going to have to go miles away to find the pharmacy that they need their prescription meds from.
And it'll get further and further away because that crime, once those stores are closed, the criminals aren't going to stop just because the stores are closed. They'll go to the next one.
And then the tragedy is the people who watch this, who have the wherewithal to move, they move. They move to safer places. The people who are stuck behind
can't.
are the poor that supposedly the Rob Bontas, the
Right.
George
It cares
Gascon,
about. They
cares
care
about.
it. Right, sure.
And these are the ones being left behind because of their policies, and they can't see. They see the net, or maybe they do see it, but they certainly don't articulate the consequences of their policies.
Yes, the spiraling negative effect on society, you can't calculate it because here's what happens. There are people who are generally honest. But if they see somebody walking out of the CVS with $900 worth of stuff and they're standing in a long line with $20 worth of stuff, they might just walk out with the $20 worth of stuff. So what happens, the respect for law and order declines over everybody. It's not just the hardened criminals. The people who would normally be honest are now going to say, fuck it, I'm not going to stand in line. They'll leave with it.
Well, it was that whole broken windows philosophy. It's a book that came out in the late 70s, early 80s. Chief Bratton from New York, who eventually came to Los Angeles, propounded it. And the theory was, look, if you allow criminals to graffiti a subway and break the windows, that when people are looking around, they're seeing lawlessness exist and grow, it actually affects their thinking on whether or not they want to be lawful.
Right.
And so, again, that's a spiral of lawlessness, but you can reverse the spiral. When you fix the broken windows, when you get rid of the graffiti.
Giuliani did that in New York.
He did.
He
Giuliani
broken windows.
might have had problems later in his life.
Yes, right.
But when he was the mayor of New York,
he did the right
He worked
thing.
with Bill Bratton, and they built New York back into
They
the great
built
city
it back.
it was.
They did stop and frisk. They knew who the criminals were. They knew if you're hanging around, five guys hanging around in a corner, hey, get over here, let me frisk you. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. It's statistics.
Well, and then what happened? Interestingly, back to that spiral of lawfulness, when people knew that they might be frisked on the street, they stopped carrying guns. They stopped carrying their drugs on the street.
Makes sense, yeah.
And the amount of crime that then started to not happen went and started to escalate. And then all of a sudden, people would start having picnics in parks again because they weren't worried that the drug dealer next to them would have a bad drug deal. Guns would come out or knives would come out, but usually guns, and the bullets would start flying. When that wasn't happening because people were being stopped and frisked and their guns were being taken away. And again, even when they weren't being taken away, it was the deterrent message.
Right.
Because the reason they didn't carry their gun to a park to have a gang fight out is because they knew they could be stopped and frisked.
Yep. Some tough stories here. All right, so crime. We have to be firmer on this. We have to enforce the laws or change the laws. Let's change them back to where they were, right? And why you would raise the level of or change the level of a felony down to below $950 and make it a misdemeanor, it's ridiculous. That's still a lot of money. $950 is a lot of money. And I understand it. That's per incident.
Yes. That's
not per day.
No, that's what a lot of people don't appreciate. You could literally go from CVS to CVS to CVS and keep doing this.
Yeah.
Different ways, as long as it's different
Same
ways.
day.
Same day.
Yeah.
Every
Separate
year.
incidents, as they say.
Things have gotten so bad that in the state legislature, which is generally no friend to changing laws, especially if they're going to negatively affect defendants, Democrats have been pitching laws to change Proposition 47. They want to either bring it back to where it was, create a serial type of theft law that if you do 3 of these in 60 days, it becomes a felony.
Yeah, that's fair. Right. It's not 950 for ad infinitum.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And again, that's when you really know that the line has been crossed in society. When people who almost always stood up for defendants and for weakening our laws are hearing from their own constituents, enough.
Gone too far.
Enough is enough. Daenu. Enough is enough. Daenu. And
excellent.
And they're coming back and they're saying, okay, we're going to fix it. Now they look tough, but at least they're moving in the right direction. And I respect that. I mean, I remember what the only saying that Ronald Reagan had on his desk was, if you don't care who gets the credit, you can do a lot of great things in this world. And so if a Democrat wants to go ahead and propose a smart law on safety and security, hallelujah, let them get all the credit.
Absolutely right. It's not a Republican or Democrat thing.
Exactly.
The next thing that I think that people are concerned with is homelessness. Now, in my view, homelessness isn't because there are no homes. This is not the issue. And I know a lot of leftists think, oh, let's just build more homes for them. That's not the issue. People are homeless. There's a reason they're homeless. It's not because of the price of housing. All right? It's because they have mental problems or drug problems. That's why they're homeless. And I know this from experience. When we first moved here in California from Boston, we were staying at a small hotel while we were looking for property. And it was off of La Jolla Village Drive. And I drive the 5 and get off on an exit. And there was a homeless guy with a sign saying, "Homeless, please help." And I knew better than to feed that, than to give them money, because that's just more incentive to keep on doing it. But I wanted my kids to understand what homeless was like. This is 15 years ago. So I said to my wife, Mo, I said, you know what, this Sunday, I'm going to take my 2 boys. At that time, they were 10 and 13, I think something like that maybe. And I said, we're going to go begging. We're going to go homeless. And we didn't go to Staples to buy, nice cardboard. We went to the dumpster in that motel where we were staying and pulled out some old cardboard, and with a Marks a Lot, we wrote up 3 signs. Barney's sign, he's the younger, said, homeless can't find a house in Rancho Santa Fe under $10 million. That's really what the sign said. Barney said, homeless can't find a house in La Jolla under $15 million. And my sign said, homeless stock options underwater. Stock options, right? And I went with a nice shirt and a tie, and I happened to wear a cap, and it was a Ferrari cap. And we stood at the exit from the 5 at La Jolla Village Drive that Sunday. My wife said, no, don't do that. And the kids didn't want to do it. And I said, no, kids, I'll split it with you. And that I motivated them, right? So they decided, okay. And my wife said, oh, you're crazy. Don't do that. You'll embarrass them. But we went out. It was a nice sunny day. Now, it turns out on that corner where we usually see the same fellow begging, he wasn't there. You know why? They don't work weekends. It's true. Take weekends off. So we were there and held up our signs, which were very honest, right? And people stopped. And at the end of the first hour, we had $80 in about $60 in cash and $20 in packaged food with a little sign saying, have a better day. And I concluded there are 3 kinds of people in San Diego, at any rate, on the 5. The first type, which is the majority, 80%, don't make eye contact at all. They don't make eye contact at all. The second type, most frequent, were women who stopped and gave money. The third type were people who read the signs, mainly men, and they went like this and smiled. They knew it was a joke. But then I was challenged at the end of an hour, and that was about as long as it could be. And by the way, before we finished, the fellow who used to use that corner came over, and he asked me what we're doing, and he talked to Max and Barney. He said, your father is very interesting. You're going to learn from this experience. He was not a stupid guy. He was homeless, but not stupid. He pulled out his cell phone and took pictures, by the way. So then at the end of the hour, I figured, okay, well, that's not the lesson I thought they'd learn, that you can easily get money by begging. So I was now challenged with what to do with this money that I got deceptively. So I said, okay, I'm going to give it to the homeless. So I went to the web and found the San Diego Rescue Mission, and I spoke to people there, and I told a bit about my background, and I'm interested in a tour. And they invited me there to the tour of the San Diego Rescue Mission. I went the next week with my kids, took a tour, and they had just taken over this nice facility. It was a hospital, and they're converting it into a shelter for the homeless. And as we walked around, I noticed that the capacity, I was told the capacity was 300 people, but there were only 150 people there. And I said, Mike, I don't understand. Why aren't we full? Because we have lots of homeless people on the street. He said, well, Dr. Bob, we go out every night with a van to recruit people to come to this shelter. Now, we do have rules in the shelter. We'll take you in. We're going to clean you up. You're going to be free of alcohol and drugs. You have to stay, I think it's 3 months. You're not kidnapped, but if you leave, you can't come back. It's 3 months. We teach you about God. It's a Christian organization, which is fine. I'm a Jew, but any kind of religion that welcomes people like that, helps them, is fine with me. And he said, we go out with a van, and most people don't want to come. It's a lifestyle. They are addicted to drugs and alcohol. And he happened to mention, and he said, by the way, they typically get $80 a day, which is exactly what I raised. And that's sufficient for what they need, and they're happy with that freedom. And it's a sin for people to give to them. It's feeding that habit, right, which shouldn't be fed. They should have to come and get cured of these things, and we can help them. So that's my story about the homeless. And I remember as a child when I grew up, driving to wherever we were going, and we passed some buildings, and I remember asking my father, what was that building? It was a state hospital. Now, maybe before your time, but in the 60s, 70s, 50s, before then, anytime before then, there were facilities for people with mental illness who were brought off the street, yes, against their will, but when you're mental, that's the honorable thing to do. That is the kind thing to do. Take them off the street where they can be safe, and they were treated in these facilities called state hospitals. But what happened? And there were no homeless because you'd get arrested and you get sent to the state hospital. And what happened? I think it was in the 70s, the left came out in force, said it's against their rights, their constitution, this, human rights, and it's better for them to be integrated with society. And that's what we have now. You can see them in their tents, pooping on the street. They're being integrated in society. This is the left that did it because the left are morons. They never understand the consequences of the next step of what they're proposing to do. And that in the state hospitals around the country closed. There are no state hospitals anymore. There are mental institutions where you have to sign in, but there are no such thing, as I understand it, as state hospitals where the police or the judge could send you for 90 days and to detoxify you against your will. And that's why we have this problem. And it will not be solved. I know in San Francisco, the city is renting hotels, low-end hotels, maybe even mid-range hotels, putting the homeless in hotels, delivering to them drugs and alcohol, delivering that to them, and they think that's a cure for homelessness. So what are we going to do when you're Attorney General?
So let me give you a couple ideas of things that I've come across up and down the state that I look at as great ideas that need to be scaled up. And let's deal with this mandatory placement for people suffering from serious mental illness or substance abuse disorder. Right now, ironically, back to that idea that if someone has a good idea or they even stumbles onto it, I'll applaud it. Gavin Newsom, who generally I do not think much of, has proposed something called a care court, C-A-R-E. And what it is, it's going to allow a judge the option, under certain very regimented circumstances, to order mandatory mental health treatment for someone in lieu of going to prison. I mean,
that sounds
shocking.
Right.
It sounds right.
Shocking.
Now, he is being excoriated by the ACLU and the far left. They can't believe that Gavin Newsom has done this. Right. And he's doing
what would they prefer?
They prefer, in my mind, suffering. Human people being on the street,
suffering,
living in unsanitary conditions, dangerous. Right. We had a homeless encampment that was 2 miles from my house. 2 murders happened in 6 months. You know, these folks were living these horrible lives, dangerous lives, and the far left seems to prefer that for them.
Oh, it's their right.
It's their right.
To have it. Yeah.
Because even if you give them a house, they don't stay there. No. They go back to the street because it's their right. And according to the left, it's their right to set up their tent anywhere. Of course, it'd be interesting if they set up their tent on
Nancy Pelosi's front yard.
On Nancy Pelosi's front desk. Yeah. I mean, that would be a shot of seeing all the tents on her porch. San Francisco, I don't know if you know this, has something called the poop map. You can literally look it up on your phone. San Francisco poop map. Because every time human feces is reported to the city to pick it up, they log it in. And they actually have created a poop map
you can go
which is disgusting.
Yeah.
To show you how much human feces exists in San Francisco on the street at any moment in time. Right. And so, but what's interesting about Gavin Newsom, and again, I applaud the care court, because what happened last August is they tried the same thing with substance abuse courts. What had happened, as you know, is that they used to have drug diversion courts in this state.
Oh, I didn't know.
The way they got people into it is they had the hammer of going to state prison. Mm-hmm. If you did a drug crime, you could be looking at 2 years of state prison or an 18-month drug diversion court, rigorous program. But if you succeeded in getting through it, you didn't have a conviction on your record.
Oh, wonderful.
Made sense.
Yeah.
And these were being proposed and implemented across the state, and they were graduating hundreds of people in LA, San Francisco, all the major counties, and they really turned their life around, because you can't get over a drug addiction in 30 days.
Or in jail.
But with an 18-month rigorous program where you had to be clean and sober, report in, do urine tests, the whole thing, they got successful graduates. But what did they do? They got rid of the hammer. Proposition 47, the other thing it did besides property crimes is it dealt with possession crimes.
I see. It's not a crime anymore. It's a
misdemeanor.
Crime.
It's a misdemeanor. It's not prosecuted.
So you couldn't threaten them with jail to take that other treatment, and so they didn't.
The drug courts dried up.
Oh,
so now they tried to last August. They tried to bring it back in some respect. They wanted to do a pilot project in Yolo County, of all places, because the DA there is a really sharp guy named Jeff Rasig. He combines with Democrats and Republicans, and the bill passes 65-1 in the state assembly. You can't get more bipartisan than that. To set up a pilot project to allow judges the additional option of ordering mandatory substance abuse treatment in a secure facility. They can't leave, as opposed to just putting them in jail. So it gets to the governor's desk, and at that time, the governor, I don't know, I think his thinking was too influenced by the far left and the ACLU. He vetoes the bill. Fast forward 8 months, the same issue comes up with mental health, and he's for it, because he realizes that nothing the far left was proposing is even getting remotely close to tackling the homeless problem. So there are these possibilities that are existing right now to try and deal with, chip away at part of the problem. There's an interesting book that if you hadn't had a chance to read, you would find fascinating, called San Francisco. It's written by a guy named Michael Schellenberger, who I happened to meet the other day. He's actually running for governor as an independent, strange enough. Brilliant guy. He is from the far left. And the book is entitled How the Progressive Left Has Ruined San Francisco. But he writes it having been, his bona fides on the far left. He got arrested. He's marched, the whole thing.
Right.
And he is incensed at how we're just trying to build housing first and not dealing with mental health and substance abuse.
Right. It has nothing to do with housing. Nothing to do with housing.
If he was sitting in my seat,
Wow.
he would say, Dr. Bob, spot on. Yeah, you got the problem. Because a small fraction, 20% of the problem, is the person who just lost their job.
Sure.
They're living out of their car or that.
Small.
And they only need another job. I mean, that's actually one of the more solvable homeless problems. If
that's easier.
That's much easier. But the substance abuse, I mean, this is chronic stuff.
No, in every society, we have people on the fringe, and we always will. And you can't say it's because of they're not just integrated into society. They can't integrate into society. They need to be treated. Right. And mental illness is an illness that's not easily treated.
Oh,
okay. We all know people who have problems. These take years to solve, and during that time, protect them. Put them in facilities where they can be looked after. And sure, there must be horror stories about facilities, and everybody's heard of one flew over the cuckoo's nest. But for sure, it's better than being in a tent on Main Street or Market Street in San Francisco.
I mean, Sheriff Villanueva of Los Angeles, they have 70,000 homeless people. He says that there are 5 homeless people per day that die on the streets. How is that compassionate?
Yeah, how's that compassionate?
Yeah. There's nothing compassionate about allowing these folks to die on the street.
In addition, of course, to the sadness of those people is the effect on the quality of life of the rest of us.
Right.
All right? To have to walk around needles or dog shit or people shit. This is not the way a civilization, a highly respected, high-end civilization should function. And I won't go to San Francisco anymore. Last time I was there, they're sleeping, right in front of restaurants, in front of Louis Vuitton, in front of Tiffany's. You have to step over bodies to get into a store. That is not the way it was when I grew up, and it should not be the way it is now. Quality of life has gone down dramatically because of what you see and what you experience every day. The crime and the crime and homelessness. A friend of mine told me, he has a neighbor. I think it was La Jolla. It was one of these nice neighborhoods. And this person had a porch, a lady, and there's a homeless person sleeping and making noise on her front porch. She called the police. Well, first of all, she told them to get lost, but they're out of it. They don't know where they are. And called the police, and in the discussion, the policeman or the clerk, expediter, said, "Is he hurting anyone?" "No." "Well, I'm sorry, we're too busy to respond." They're too busy to respond. Trespassing, potentially a serious problem. These are crazy. You don't know what they're going to do. They wouldn't even send an officer to respond to a trespasser by a crazy person on somebody's porch who's acting irrationally. So what's the next thing the person's going to do, I know people who would respond themselves. If the police aren't going to come, I don't want to take a risk this person on my front porch. I'm going to do something to get him off my porch, right? And somebody's going to get hurt in that process. The police won't respond. What are they going to charge the person with? And even if they charge them, going to be released.
Well, I heard the Riverside County Sheriff speak the other day, and he was asked, what is one of the bigger problems you have for officers getting injured? And he said, without a doubt, dealing with the homeless. Because of all the different situations that can come up, whether, again, they have violent mental illness, whether or not they have knives, guns, hypodermic needles.
Or they're sick and they're filthy. And
nowadays with fentanyl, as you know, if the officers get any fentanyl on their hands or they inhale it, you can actually die because it's only 2 milligrams of fentanyl that'll kill you in 2 minutes unless you get a Narcan dose.
Ooh.
So he said that dealing with the homeless
Is the most dangerous?
Most dangerous, and takes up an inordinate amount of their time.
Right, because they have to be calm. They don't pull their gun. Whereas if it's a criminal, a real criminal, that they can use methods of force,
right,
or a taser to quell the situation. Well, homeless, you can't do that.
Right.
All right, tell me about fentanyl now. I know very little about it, only that much of it is coming from China. That's what I read. I don't know if it's true. And that it is so potent that it kills people because they don't realize how potent it is. So,
right.
Describe it to me. Is it like heroin? Is it a powder? I know nothing about it.
Sure. Fentanyl is a man-made opiate. The ingredients, for the most part, have been coming from China. They used to come. The pills used to come directly from China into the United States. One of the things that happened.
Was it a prescription drug to start with?
Well, so fentanyl used to be, it's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. It was 2 milligrams of it can kill you in 2 minutes because it'll literally stop your lungs from breathing. So what they did is that they developed this man-made opiate for basically end-of-life pain management.
Ah, I see.
This is when morphine no longer works on someone. Heroin doesn't work. You're in so much pain. So
it's people in hospice.
Yes. Carefully titrated small doses of fentanyl will bring you pain relief that even heroin and morphine won't. Mm-hmm. The problem is it's incredibly cheap to make. It's man-made. You don't need the poppies from Afghanistan. You can literally make the stuff with ingredients in a drug lab. Mm-hmm. And what the drug dealers found out, is that it's highly addictive. So if you lace it into fake pills, for instance, fake Oxycontin, Xanax, Adderall, Percocet, do millions of these pills. Some will have lethal doses, most won't. The DEA estimates 4 out of 10 can have a lethal dose of fentanyl now.
And why do people take it? What is the high of fentanyl?
So again, I've never taken fentanyl or these opiates, but when you hear it described, it makes you, if you have pain, it makes the pain go away.
Okay, all right.
If your pain is psychological pain, because your life is horrible, you come from a bad family life, you don't have a job, life is otherwise a complete despair, and you don't see a way out. You take one of these pills, you forget all your troubles.
I see.
So many, and that's putting aside the kids that are experimenting with it.
It's not getting you high necessarily.
It's getting you euphoric.
Euphoric, okay.
But the problem, of course, is that once you get there, your body will develop resistance to it. So you need more and more of it to get to the same place. But with fentanyl, you quickly cross the line where it will kill you. It'll just shut down your whole pulmonary system, and you won't wake up unless you get a anti-opiate blast called Narcan or Naxalone,
Narcan, yeah.
And that'll actually bring you back from the dead. So what happened is the drug dealers, it's all profit. It's profit motive.
Yeah, it's less opium. Opium's expensive.
Exactly.
Right, I see.
And then they don't care quite candidly about the collateral consequences because they'll, so a couple thousand people will die. It doesn't eat that much into the profits. And they can just keep expanding and expanding the business. And then what they're doing, which is even more dangerous, is they're lacing it into marijuana. They're lacing it into cocaine, ecstasy, methamphetamine, heroin itself. You might have read in the paper over spring break, 6 West Point cadets in spring break in California were doing cocaine. Turned out it was laced with fentanyl, and 4 of them died. Now, nobody wants to applaud anybody doing cocaine in this society, but they didn't think they were going to have any chance of dying.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. You don't know which cocaine or which drugs has the lethal dose of fentanyl. The joke is, as you know, with Russian roulette, it's 1 bullet and a 6-shooter. That's 1 out of 6. This is 4 out of 10. Wow. Your odds are actually worse if you take a fake Oxycontin pill in the United States than if you put a bullet in a 6-shooter and spun the barrel. I mean, it's that serious. So what I would do as the California Attorney General is we would join. Right now, the California Attorney General is completely absent when it comes to fentanyl
The
prosecutions.
DEA doesn't do anything with the Drug Enforcement Agency. Nothing with the feds.
Almost nothing.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. Some district attorneys' offices very active. The federal government fairly active. State of California missing in action.
Yeah.
I would get us signed up to every task force and focus on fentanyl. I'd have a weekly fentanyl report going out from the California Attorney General's office. Then I would get on a massive education campaign. I target middle and high schoolers, students, and parents, and say, folks, this is not about getting high. If you want, this is not. I'm not trying to ruin your high here. I'm talking about literal poison. And if you take one of these things and you think you're taking cocaine or marijuana or ecstasy,
You don't know.
you're putting your life in your hands every single time.
Yeah, I think it's the right approach. Don't try to be against drugs in general because people want to take drugs. They want to get high. It's not going to be effective. It's proper, but it's not going to be effective. The best approach is this is dangerous. You're going to get killed.
Right. I mean, ironically, the Mexican drug lords have made it so if you have a Just Say No program, there's actually some teeth behind it now. This is not just saying no to getting high.
Yeah.
This is just saying no to not dying.
To dying. Yeah.
So, I mean, they've created their own. Nancy Reagan would probably applaud the punishment or the consequence that the Mexican drug dealers have now put into using something as simple as marijuana or cocaine that's illegal.
But I assume that the marijuana that you buy in dispensaries is okay.
The legal marijuana is fine.
Yeah.
This is the entire illegal marijuana market, which is still very active, even in California and even in the states that have legalized marijuana, because it's a lot cheaper.
I forget if it was you or someone else who made me aware of this. I thought that making marijuana legal was the right thing and that it would end the illegal marijuana. But the problem is, and our viewers may not know this, but the states put tax on the marijuana,
Huge
on the legal marijuana, which makes it very expensive, which is an umbrella under which the illegal marijuana comes in. So we should probably just not tax it, just not let people grow it and sell it. It has to be approved. It has to be in licensed facilities, so we know that it's pure, or it's safe, and let people use it. I just an aside on drugs. I don't think the government should have any role in what you put into your mouth or into your body. I just don't get it, why the government should regulate that. I think we need education to talk about the side effects, the downside of using drugs, as we do with alcohol. But making it illegal has made it expensive, which causes huge profits. That's what it generates, huge profits, which then corrupt entire countries. And alcohol, that happened with alcohol during Prohibition, of course. That led to the mafia or organized crime because alcohol was illegal, so criminals made it and made money, and that led to organized crime. And then we made it legal, and you buy it in approved places with the licenses and whatever, and the tax stamp on it. I don't know why we don't do that with drugs. I just don't understand. And from my understanding and talking to doctors, everybody talks about heroin is a horrible drug. I mean, fentanyl's obviously worse, and every doctor's told me the effect of heroin, you go to sleep. You go to sleep. It's called being on the nod. And, people who can't afford a psychiatrist, heroin is their drug of escape. And is that the worst possible thing if 2% of our society is on the nod? Rather than, and I'm not pro-drug, but there are two alternatives. Either it's legal or it's illegal. And we've tried the illegal method, making it illegal, and the war on drugs. It ain't over. It was 20 years old, and we're still having the war on drugs. You can't win the war on drugs because the more that you make it difficult to get, the higher the price goes. And the higher the price goes, the more corruption. So of the two alternatives, I think making virtually every drug legal and having it regulated is the appropriate solution, the best solution. But it's not going to happen. And you know why it's not going to happen? Because both sides are making too much money on it. It's the criminal side and the side that's prosecuting it. You have the DEA. You have all of these resources now who are getting paid and getting pensions and getting bonuses for cracking down on drugs. So certainly the criminals don't want it legalized, and I think the Justice Department doesn't want it legalized. And they may make up all sorts of reasons for it, but the main reason is that they're running their own business. So, and you don't have to comment on that. It's just a personal view. And I know in Europe they have a much different view on drugs, and it's probably a more rational view. There is a need for time immemorial. People have wanted to try things that change the state of their mind, either to get them high on marijuana so you giggle and you want to eat food, or you want to go to sleep because your life is horrible. Either way, some percentage of our society needs drugs, and alcohol's a drug. Alcohol's a drug. We all, many people take alcohol and use it to calm down or to celebrate. It's part of life, and I think, when rational people sit down and could think about it, they would just say, make it legal.
And your points are all well taken. I think where I would modify some of those points dealing with minors. I think that
minors, different story. I agree with you. No.
And then the other thing is you'd have to put in some pretty, I don't know if it's regulations or some type of programming to deal with addicts. That at the point that someone becomes addicted to heroin and literally can't start, it's affected their brain chemistry. They literally can't think straight anymore. And now they've lost their job. They've lost their family. The only thing that's keeping them in existence is to find the next fix for their heroin addiction. You don't want a whole bunch of society looking like that.
Well, we already do. And, what happens is that because
or at least a certain section of our society
we already do.
Like
and
that.
Because of the cost of it, they have to commit crimes in order to buy it. So the jails are filled with people who committed crimes because they couldn't afford the drugs. Give them the drug. Let's accept the fact that some percent of society will be out to lunch. At least they won't be causing problems if we sell it to them or give it to them at a low price. But it's likely not to happen. So move on to the next one.
Okay.
The border. This is a horrible situation. Every country in the world has borders. Every country. Yet the left wants this country to have open borders. And open borders means you don't have a country. I mean, every kid who went to kindergarten, first grade, drew maps with lines on it. The line is the border. This is Hungary. This is Czechoslovakia. This is Romania. A border. And a border is a way of defining the people inside, and we have certain rules that people over here in their borders don't have. There are commonalities. There's no possible argument to having no borders. There's no precedent for it. And the left is doing this intentionally, again, to destroy the fabric of this country. My grandparents came here legally. They didn't want to retain their culture. They wanted to become American. They had heard about America. They read about America, came here penniless for the American dream of opportunity, of the chance of building a life where you could go out and try your best at your trade without being interfered with by the government. And this country has generously let hundreds of millions of people in through that process. Why should we not continue that?
You know, it's funny, Dr. Bob. The other day I was on the freeway, and there was an exit I had to get off of. And the lineup to get off that exit went on forever. You know, it was probably a 15-minute wait. And as I'm getting close to the exit, I see this car from in the back of my rearview mirror. It's way back there, but it goes the lane next to me. And it is just zooming and zooming and zooming. At the last second, 3 cars in front of me, after not waiting for 15 minutes, waiting for 15 seconds, it zips in and cuts in front of me. and everybody's honking and whatnot. But there's no one in that line that thought what we just witnessed was fair or just. Not one.
Great analogy.
And
Great
and that's
analogy.
and for the people who spent months, more like
Years. I've
and sometimes a decade.
Yeah.
Depending on their situation.
Getting in legally.
Legally. And they're patient and they're waiting in their own country.
And they did the thing. They filled out the forms. They did the tests.
Right. And we have lotteries periodically.
Yep.
People luck out and they'll just win the lottery, literally win the lottery to get in. But it's mostly people taking years to get into this country.
Yeah.
And that's my initial pushback, is that if you want to cut the line, I have no problem making sure that you get caught and you get put back at the bottom of the line.
Right.
Now you're at the bottom of the line.
Right.
You don't get to cut the line just because you want to cut the line. And then the people who come into this country illegally and then commit crimes in this country, it's insanity that we give them any particular preference. So one of the negative ramifications of sanctuary cities in our state is this. So a person comes in the country illegally, they then commit a crime and they're arrested by the locals or even the state prison system. The sanctuary cities prohibit local law enforcement to work with the immigration authorities, because the immigration authorities, once they realize that this person is sitting in the prison, they put a detainer on him. And the detainer is supposed to be executed immediately after the service of the state or local sentence, so that they're turned over to the immigration authorities and then brought out and deported from this country. When you have sanctuary cities, the local officers don't notify the immigration authority. They're prohibited from notifying the immigration authorities that they have this person in custody. So what ends up happening is the person gets out of custody. Now they go and they're roaming around the streets, either committing more crimes.
Well, they're not becoming ideal citizens, that's for sure.
There's no incentive to become an ideal citizen because you're already here illegally, which is a crime. So what happens, though, is that the immigration authorities then go looking for them. And they prioritize these people because
they're criminals.
Because they're criminals. Now, they go into someone's apartment building where they're located, and guess who else is in the apartment building?
Women and children, whatever.
8 other people, all of whom are illegals, but they're working hard, they're paying taxes. They're not here legally, but they're not causing problems either. But once the immigration authorities show up, they ask everybody, show us your papers. So all of a sudden, not only do they get the one person that they're looking for, but they get the 6 other people. They get caught in the roundup, unfortunately. And now you've created the tragedy in the immigrant community that somehow these, the unintended consequences of supposedly pro-immigrant sanctuary cities is now destroying immigrant lives. If I'm the California Attorney General, I don't have the power to legislate, but I can turn the huge spotlight on certain issues. And I would make it pretty darn clear to the immigrant communities the unintended or maybe even intended consequences of sanctuary cities and say, folks, this was the bill of goods you were sold was wrong. Here's what's really happening in the streets. It's not pro-immigrant. If anything, it's anti-immigrant. So we need to change these laws to allow the immigration authorities to work with local police.
To be notified.
Correct.
And for that detainee to be handed over.
Right, because these people, by the way, the crimes that they're committing, they're generally not in the more affluent communities. They're committing these crimes in the immigrant communities.
In the first place,
And that's the tragedy of what's been going on.
So how many sanctuary cities do we now have in California?
Well, it's a state law. So it's...
So the state is
the state allows. Well, it's a state law that allows a city to become a sanctuary city.
But we're a sanctuary state then.
Yeah, we're effectively a sanctuary state, or we can become a complete sanctuary state.
And this places a much bigger burden on the feds, on the immigration and custom enforcement people, because now they have to locate that person, rearrest that person. Otherwise, he'd be handed over in handcuffs.
Correct. It's much more dangerous for everyone concerned.
Right.
Law enforcement, even the person being arrested, everyone around him.
And the neighborhood where he's being arrested.
Right. And a huge amount of resources that are now having to be expended that you would be able to save and apply in other areas.
It all makes a lot of sense to me. Your positions are common sense positions, and they're driven by your experience. 30 years?
30 years.
30 years of law enforcement and a legal experience in the criminal justice system. And, I'm just so impressed. And I want to thank you for spending your time with me today. And
Well, thank you very much.
thank you, Nathan, so much more for your willingness to give up your successful and I think lucrative private practice, to run for Attorney General of California and to work hard to reverse the slide toward lawlessness that we are currently experiencing in our state. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me on, Dr. Bob. This has been one of the privileges and pleasures of running for California Attorney General.
Well, I'm rooting for you, and I hope, and I'm going to work hard to help you be successful.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, please subscribe, and you'll be automatically notified of future podcasts in this series.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.